On a rain-soaked evening in Cedar Ridge, Montana, a 12-year-old boy named Cassian Merrick stood at the edge of a gravel lot outside Billy's Roadhouse, clutching a crumpled photograph of his father. His sneakers were soaked through, his hands trembling not from the cold, but from desperation. Inside, the Hells Angels were gathered, leather vests bearing their patch, engines still ticking from the ride. Cassian had heard stories about them, dangerous men, outlaws, but he also heard they kept promises. And his father, Brennan Merrick, a firefighter who once saved the life of one of their own, was now missing, lost somewhere across the Canadian border after a rescue mission went silent. The boy's entrance silenced the room. Heads turned. One man, a towering figure with silver streaks in his beard and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, stepped forward. His name was Raven Cross, chapter president, Marine Corps veteran, and a man who understood the weight of a promise made in fire. Cassian's voice cracked as he spoke. "Please, bring my dad home." He placed the photograph on the bar. Raven picked it up, studied the face, and remembered. Brennan Merrick had pulled him from a burning truck 5 years ago. Raven owed him a debt, and debts, in his world, were paid in full. What happened next would ripple through Cedar Ridge like a stone dropped into still water. Raven made a call, then another. By dawn, 73 motorcycles lined the street outside the Merrick home. Flags were mounted, routes were mapped. A convoy was forming, not for vengeance, but for rescue, for honor, for a boy who refused to let his father become a ghost. And when the town woke that morning to the thunder of engines, they knew something extraordinary was about to unfold. What the Hells Angels arranged wasn't just a search, it was a testament to the kind of loyalty that transcends laws, borders, and fear. It was a promise delivered with iron and fire. The rain fell hard over Cedar Ridge, turning Main Street into a river of mud and neon reflections. It was the kind of night when most people stayed indoors, curtains drawn against the storm. But Cassian Merrick wasn't like most people. At 12 years old, he had already learned what it meant to carry weight too heavy for his age. His father, Brennan, had been missing for 11 days. 11 days since the last transmission from the Canadian Rockies. 11 days since the rescue helicopter lost contact. 11 days of silence. If you're hearing this story for the first time, please subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happens next will shake you to your core. Cassian walked through the rain with his father's photograph pressed against his chest. He had tried the police. They told him to wait. He had tried the fire department. They told him search efforts were suspended due to weather. He had tried prayer, but tonight he needed more than hope. He needed action. And so he found himself standing outside Billy's Roadhouse, staring at the row of Harley-Davidsons parked like iron sentinels under the awning, the Hells Angels. His mother had warned him to stay away. His teachers whispered about them. But Cassian remembered something his father once said. "The men you fear in the daylight are sometimes the only ones brave enough to stand in the dark." Brennan had saved one of them once, a man named Raven Cross. Cassian didn't know the details, but he knew debts mattered to men like that. He pushed open the door. The room went quiet. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward the soaked kid, dripping rainwater onto the worn floorboards. Smoke curled from cigarettes. Pool cues froze mid-strike. A jukebox played something low and gravelly. Cassian's heart hammered, but he didn't turn back. He walked straight to the bar, pulled the photograph from his jacket, and placed it down with trembling hands. "My dad is Brennan Merrick," he said, his voice cracking. "He saved one of you 5 years ago. I don't know who, but I know he did. And now he's lost in the mountains, and nobody will help me bring him home." His eyes burned, not with tears, but with something fiercer. "Please, I'm begging you, bring my dad home." The room remained still. Then a chair scraped back. A man stood, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that had seen too many wars. His vest bore the patch of the Cedar Ridge chapter. His name was stitched above it, Raven Cross. He walked forward slowly, each step measured, until he stood before the boy. He picked up the photograph, studied it, and then he nodded once. "I remember him," Raven said, his voice like gravel rolling over stone. "Your father pulled me out of a burning truck on Highway 12, told me I owed him a beer." He set the photograph down gently. "Looks like I owe him more than that." Cassian's breath hitched. "Will you help?" Raven didn't answer immediately. He turned to the room. "Brennan Merrick saved my life. Now his boy is standing here asking for help. Any man who rides with honor knows what that means." He looked back at Cassian. "We'll bring your father home, kid. I promise you that." And in that moment, the boy who had knocked on iron found the army he needed. Raven Cross didn't sleep much anymore. War had burned that habit out of him years ago. But that night, after Cassian left with a promise ringing in his ears, Raven sat alone at the bar and made the first call. It went to a man named Corwin Hale, a former Navy SEAL who ran a security firm out of Billings. The line clicked. "Raven," Corwin said. "It's 1 a.m. "I need a favor," Raven replied. "A big one." There was a pause. Then, "Talk to me." Raven explained everything. The missing firefighter, the suspended search, the 12-year-old boy who had walked into a biker bar and asked for help. Corwin listened without interrupting. When Raven finished, Corwin said, "How many men do you need?" "As many as will come. Give me 6 hours." The second call went to Ledger Kane, a helicopter pilot who had flown medevac missions in Afghanistan. The third went to Thorne Ashford, a former Army Ranger who now ran a mountaineering supply company. The fourth went to a woman named Marisol Vane, a search and rescue coordinator who had retired after 20 years but still kept her gear ready. By 3 a.m, Raven had made 17 calls. By 5, he had commitments from 52 people. By dawn, the number had grown to 73. Motorcycles, trucks, gear, radios, thermal imaging equipment, climbing ropes, medical supplies. It wasn't just bikers who answered. It was veterans, firefighters, paramedics and volunteers who understood what it meant to ride for something bigger than yourself. Raven stood outside the clubhouse as the sun crept over the horizon. The sound of engines filled the air like a rising storm. One by one, they rolled in, bikes and trucks bearing flags, patches, and the faces of men and women who had answered the call. Corwin arrived first, his truck loaded with climbing gear. Ledger came next, his helicopter already fueled and ready. Thorne pulled up with a convoy of 4 vehicles, each packed with supplies. Marisol stepped out of a red Jeep, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes sharp. "Raven," she said, extending a hand. "I heard about Brennan. He's a good man." "He is," Raven said, gripping her hand, "and we're going to bring him back." At 8 o'clock, the convoy assembled outside the Merrick home. Cassian stood on the front porch, his mother beside him, her hand on his shoulder. She had barely slept. Her eyes were red, but when she saw the line of motorcycles and trucks stretching down the street, something shifted in her expression. Hope, fragile, but real. Raven walked up the steps and knelt before Cassian. "We ride at 9, he said, "and we don't come back without him." Cassian nodded, unable to speak. Raven stood, tipped his head to Cassian's mother, and walked back to his bike. The engines roared to life, a sound that shook windows and rattled shutters. Neighbors stepped onto their porches. Some raised their hands in silent salute. Others wiped tears from their faces. The convoy rolled out, flags snapping in the wind, the sun glinting off chrome and steel. And in that moment, Cedar Ridge understood what it meant to witness a promise in motion. The road to the Canadian Rockies was long and unforgiving. The convoy moved like a single organism, 73 vehicles strong, winding through valleys and climbing into the high country where the air grew thin and the trees stood like skeletal witnesses. Raven rode at the front, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Behind him, Corwin drove a truck loaded with climbing gear. Ledger flew recon overhead in his helicopter, and Thorne navigated a jeep packed with thermal imaging equipment. The last known coordinates for Brennan's helicopter were deep in the wilderness, an area so remote that even the official search teams had deemed it too dangerous to access by ground. The weather had turned brutal. Snow had fallen. Temperatures had dropped, but Raven didn't care about danger. He cared about a promise made to a boy who refused to give up. They reached base camp by mid-afternoon. It was a clearing at the edge of a ravine, surrounded by jagged peaks that scraped the sky. Marisol spread a map across the hood of Corwin's truck, marking the search grid with red lines. "The helicopter went down somewhere in this sector," she said, tapping the map. "It's steep terrain, unstable. If he survived the crash, he could be anywhere within a 5-mile radius." "Then we cover all 5 miles, Raven said. The team divided into groups. Corwin led the climbers. Thorne took the thermal imaging crew. Ledger circled overhead, scanning for heat signatures. Marisol coordinated communications, keeping everyone connected through handheld radios. Raven joined the ground team, moving on foot through dense forest and over rocky outcrops. The search was slow, methodical. Every ridge was checked, every crevice explored. Hours passed, the sun began to dip, and then, just as the light started to fail, Ledger's voice crackled over the radio. "I've got something," he said. "Heat signature, northeast quadrant, 300 meters from your position." Raven's heart slammed in his chest. "Move!" he barked into the radio. The ground team surged forward, pushing through underbrush and scrambling over boulders. The air was cold, sharp, biting, but Raven didn't feel it. He felt only the pull of the promise, the weight of the boy's voice echoing in his mind. "Please bring my dad home." They found the wreckage first, twisted metal scattered across a slope, the helicopter's tail rotor embedded in a tree. Then they found the man. Brennan Merrick lay beneath a makeshift shelter of branches and a torn parachute, his legs splintered with sticks, his face pale but breathing. "Alive!" Marisol dropped to her knees beside him, checking his pulse. "He's hypothermic, dehydrated, but he's alive." She looked up at Raven. "We need to move him now." Raven knelt, gripping Brennan's shoulder. "Brennan," he said, "your boy sent us. We're taking you home." Brennan's eyes flickered open. He tried to speak, but his voice was a rasp. Raven leaned closer. "Don't talk. Save your strength. We've got you. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. Moving Brennan down the mountain was a test of endurance, skill, and sheer will. The terrain was treacherous, loose rock, narrow ledges, and slopes that dropped into darkness. Corwin rigged a rescue harness, securing Brennan to a stretcher. 4 men carried him, rotating every 20 minutes to conserve strength. Marisol led the way, marking safe paths with reflective tape. Thorne brought up the rear, scanning for obstacles with his thermal scope. The temperature plummeted as night fell. Wind howled through the peaks, carrying ice and snow. Ledger hovered overhead, his helicopter's spotlight cutting through the darkness, guiding the team step by step. It was slow going. Every foot gained was a victory. Every stumble risked everything. At one point, the path narrowed to a ledge barely wide enough for one person. Corwin went first, testing each foothold. Then came Brennan on the stretcher, suspended by ropes. Raven followed, his hands gripping the rock, his breath visible in the freezing air. Behind him, the others moved in silence, their focus absolute. Hours passed. The convoy waited at base camp, engines idling, lights blazing. Word had spread back to Cedar Ridge. Cassian sat by the phone, his mother beside him, neither speaking, both praying. The town held its breath. At 2 a.m, the ground team emerged from the forest. Brennan was still breathing. Marisol worked quickly, wrapping him in thermal blankets, starting an IV drip. Ledger landed his helicopter in the clearing, and they loaded Brennan inside. "Go," Raven said. "Get him to the hospital." Ledger didn't hesitate. The helicopter lifted off, its lights disappearing into the night. The ground team stood in silence, exhausted but unbroken. Raven looked at Corwin. "We did it." Corwin nodded. "We did." Back in Cedar Ridge, the hospital was lit like a beacon. News of the rescue had spread through the town faster than wildfire. By the time Ledger's helicopter touched down on the rooftop helipad, a crowd had gathered outside. Firefighters, teachers, neighbors, and strangers who had heard the story and come to witness the ending. Cassian was there, standing beside his mother, his face pale but steady. When the stretcher rolled through the doors, he ran forward, his voice cracking. "Dad!" Brennan was barely conscious, but his eyes found his son. He reached out a hand and Cassian grabbed it, holding tight. "I knew you'd come back," Cassian whispered. Brennan's lips moved. "You brought them?" "I did," Cassian said, tears streaming. "They promised, and they kept it." The medical team moved quickly, wheeling Brennan into surgery. Cassian's mother wrapped her arms around him, sobbing. The crowd outside erupted in applause, not loud or boisterous, but steady and heartfelt, a sound that spoke of gratitude, relief, and something deeper, respect. Raven arrived an hour later, the convoy rolling in behind him. He parked his bike outside the hospital and walked through the crowd. People reached out to shake his hand, to thank him, but he kept moving until he reached Cassian. The boy looked up at him, his eyes red but shining. "You did it," Cassian said. "We did it," Raven corrected. "You were brave enough to ask. That's the hardest part." Cassian nodded, then threw his arms around Raven. The big man froze for a moment, then slowly wrapped his arms around the boy. The crowd watched in silence, and more than a few wiped their eyes. Brennan's surgery lasted 6 hours. During that time, something extraordinary happened. The town of Cedar Ridge transformed. Someone brought coffee, another brought food. A local bakery opened at 4 a.m. to deliver trays of pastries. Firefighters set up a canopy outside the hospital. Teachers organized a vigil. Children drew pictures and taped them to the windows. By dawn, the hospital grounds looked like a festival of hope. Banners hung with messages. "Welcome home, Brennan. Heroes never ride alone. Cedar Ridge stands together." The Hells Angels parked their bikes in a line, engines silent, each rider standing like a sentinel. Corwin, Thorne, Marisol and Ledger joined them, their faces tired but content. When the surgeon finally emerged, the crowd went still. "He's stable," the doctor said. "He'll need months of recovery, but he's going to make it." The cheer that erupted was deafening. Cassian collapsed into his mother's arms, sobbing with relief. Raven closed his eyes, exhaling for what felt like the first time in days. Around him, the convoy members embraced, clasped hands, and wept openly. The local news arrived, cameras rolling. A reporter approached Raven. "Can you tell us what happened?" Raven looked at her, then at the crowd. "A boy asked for help. We answered. That's all." "But you risked your lives." "That's what family does," Raven interrupted. "Brennan Merrick is one of ours. Always has been. Always will be." The reporter paused, then nodded. The story went live within the hour. By noon, it had been shared thousands of times. By evening, it was national news. And by the next day, Cedar Ridge had become a symbol of something the world desperately needed to see. Proof that honor, loyalty, and love still mattered. If this story has moved you, please leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this remind us what humanity is capable of when we refuse to give up on each other. 3 days after the rescue, Brennan Merrick woke to the sound of machines beeping softly beside his hospital bed. The morphine haze had finally lifted, leaving his mind clear but his body heavy with pain. His leg was encased in white plaster, elevated by wires and pulleys. His ribs ached with every breath, but none of that mattered when he turned his head and saw Cassian asleep in the chair beside him. The boy's hand still gripping his father's fingers. Brennan's throat tightened. He squeezed his son's hand gently, and Cassian's eyes snapped open. For a moment, the boy just stared, as if afraid his father might vanish. Then tears streamed down his face, and he lunged forward, burying his face against Brennan's shoulder. "Dad," Cassian sobbed, "you're really awake. You're really here." Brennan wrapped his free arm around his son, ignoring the screaming protest from his bruised ribs. "I'm here, Cass. I'm here." His voice cracked. "You brought them. You brought the angels." Cassian pulled back, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Raven remembered you. He said you saved his life. He said debts get paid in full." The boy's voice steadied. "They rode for 3 days, Dad. 73 of them. They didn't stop, not once." Brennan closed his eyes, overwhelmed. He had spent 11 days in that frozen wilderness, his legs shattered, his radio dead, convinced he would die alone on that mountainside. He had written letters to Cassian in his mind, practicing the words he'd never get to say, and now, because a 12-year-old boy had refused to give up, he was alive. "I need to see him," Brennan said. "Raven, I need to thank him." Cassian nodded quickly. "I'll get Mom. She'll call him." The boy ran from the room, and Brennan lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. Through the window he could see the town, his town, bathed in morning light. Flags hung from storefronts, banners stretched across Main Street. Even from here, he could feel the pulse of something changed, something healed. 2 hours later, Raven Cross walked through the door. He had showered and changed, but the exhaustion still clung to him. Lines etched deeper around his eyes, shoulders carrying invisible weight. He held his leather vest in one hand, folded carefully. When he saw Brennan awake, something shifted in his expression. Relief, satisfaction. Peace. Brennan, Raven said, his voice rough. Raven. Brennan extended his hand, and Raven crossed the room in 3 long strides, gripping it firmly. The handshake lasted longer than necessary, 2 warriors acknowledging something words couldn't capture. Thank you, Brennan said, his voice breaking. For my son, for my life, for everything. Raven shook his head slowly. You saved my life 5 years ago, pulled me out of a burning truck when you had every reason to leave me there. I was just some biker on the side of the road, but you didn't see that. You saw someone who needed help. He paused. When your boy walked into Billy's, I saw you in his eyes. Same fire, same refusal to quit. You didn't owe me this, Brennan insisted. A search like that. You risked your life, all of your people. That's what brothers do, Raven interrupted quietly. You became one of ours the day you pulled me out of that fire. You just didn't know it yet. He set his vest on the bedside table. This is who we are, Brennan. We ride for family, and your family. Brennan's eyes filled. If you ever need anything, I know where to find you, Raven said, a faint smile touching his scarred face. But right now, you focus on healing. Your boy needs his father strong. Your town needs their firefighter back. And I need to know that the man who saved me is going to live long enough to see his grandkids. Brennan laughed, wincing at the pain it caused. Deal. Raven turned to leave but stopped at the door. One more thing, he said, looking back. Cassian asked if he could ride with us someday, when he's old enough. He met Brennan's eyes. I told him maybe, but only if his father says yes. Brennan looked at the vest on the table, then at the man who had become more than a stranger saved on a highway. When he's ready, Brennan said, I'll bring him to you myself. Raven nodded once, then he was gone, his boots echoing down the hospital corridor, leaving behind the scent of leather and gasoline, and something that felt like hope. The day Brennan came home, Cedar Ridge threw a parade. Not an official one. No permits, no city council approval, no marching bands, just 300 people lining Elm Street with homemade signs, American flags, and tears streaming down their faces. Cassian's mother, Elena, drove slowly, their car following a convoy of fire trucks and motorcycles that stretched for 2 blocks. Brennan sat in the passenger seat, his casted leg propped awkwardly, his window rolled down so he could wave. Every face he passed was familiar. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store, Coach Holloway from the high school, the Ramirez family who lived 3 doors down. They cheered and clapped and held up their phones to record the moment, but it wasn't loud or chaotic. It was reverent, sacred. When they pulled into the driveway, Brennan saw the house. Someone had mowed the lawn, someone had painted the fence, someone had hung wind chimes from the porch that caught the afternoon light and sang. The front yard was filled with flowers, dozens of bouquets, potted plants, wreaths. Cards were taped to the door, stacked on the porch steps, tucked into the mailbox. Who did all this? Brennan whispered. Everyone, Elena said softly. The whole town. Cassian helped his father out of the car, supporting his weight, as Brennan hobbled on crutches toward the porch. The crowd followed at a respectful distance, forming a semicircle in the street. Raven stood at the edge, arms crossed, watching silently. Beside him were Corwin, Thorne, Marisol, and Ledger, the core team who had made the impossible happen. Mayor Gretchen Albright stepped forward, a folder tucked under her arm. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen Cedar Ridge through floods, fires, and recessions. Brennan Merrick, she said, her voice carrying across the quiet street. This town owes you more than words can express. You've run into burning buildings for us. You've saved lives. You've given everything without asking for anything in return." She opened the folder. "But today, we want to honor the men and women who ran into the mountains for you." She turned to face Raven and the convoy members. "Raven Cross, Corwin Hale, Ledger Kane, Thorne Ashford, Marisol Vane, and the 73 brave souls who answered a boy's cry for help. You showed us what honor looks like, what loyalty means, and what happens when good people refuse to accept the word impossible." She held up a series of keys. "These are keys to Cedar Ridge. Symbolic, yes, but they represent something real. You are welcome here. Always. Forever. This is your home too." The crowd erupted in applause. Raven stepped forward, accepting the key with a nod. He looked at Cassian, who stood beside his father, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "We didn't do this for medals or recognition. We did it because a boy had the courage to ask for help, and a father had earned the right to be saved. That's all." Coach Holloway shouted from the crowd, "3 cheers for the convoy!" The response was immediate and thunderous. "Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!" Brennan wiped his eyes, overwhelmed. Elena wrapped her arm around his waist, steadying him. Cassian looked up at his father, grinning through tears. "We're home, Dad." "Yeah," Brennan whispered. "We are." Later that evening, after the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped below the horizon, the convoy gathered one last time at Billy's Roadhouse. The bar owner, a grizzled man named Tate, had cleared the place for a private celebration. Pizzas covered every table. Beer filled the coolers. The jukebox played something slow and bluesy. Raven raised his glass. "To Brennan Merrick, a man worth riding for." "To Brennan," the group echoed. Corwin stood next. "And to Cassian, the bravest kid any of us will ever meet." "To Cassian," they roared. Marisol added quietly, "and to every person who believed this was possible when the world said it wasn't." They drank in silence after that, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling over them like a warm blanket. Outside, Cedar Ridge slept peacefully, its streets quiet, its people dreaming of heroes who rode on iron and kept promises written in fire. 6 months later, Brennan Merrick stood on the roof of Cedar Ridge Fire Station No. 3, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. His leg had healed, though he still walked with a slight limp. The doctors said it would fade with time. But Brennan didn't mind. It was a reminder, a scar that told a story worth remembering. Below, the station buzzed with activity. New recruits trained, veterans swapped stories, and in the garage, Cassian sat astride a Harley-Davidson, Raven beside him, teaching him the basics of riding. Brennan could hear his son's laughter echoing up through the open bay doors, and it filled him with something he couldn't name. Gratitude, pride, love. Elena appeared beside him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one and leaned against the railing. "He's growing up fast," she said. "Too fast," Brennan agreed. "Raven's been good for him, gives him something to work toward, something noble." Brennan nodded. "I used to worry about the company he'd keep. Now I worry he'll set the bar so high no one will measure up." Elena smiled. "He learned that from you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the town below. Cedar Ridge had changed in subtle ways. The convoy's story had spread. Local news, then regional, then national. Documentaries were filmed, podcasts produced. But the town resisted becoming a spectacle. They protected the story, guarded its heart. ensured it remained what it had always been, a testament to the power of asking for help and the courage required to give it. Brennan had spoken at schools, fire academies, veterans' halls. He told the story of the 11 days he spent broken and alone on that mountainside, and the 73 strangers who became family. He spoke of Cassian's bravery, of Raven's honor, of the convoy's refusal to quit, and always he ended with the same message: we are strongest when we ride together, when we refuse to let fear silence our cries for help, when we honor the debts we owe, not because we must, but because it defines who we are. Tonight was different. Tonight was the dedication of the Cedar Ridge Memorial Wall, a monument honoring first responders, veterans, and those who had served the community. Brennan's name would be etched there, alongside Raven's and the convoy members. It felt surreal, uncomfortable, but also right. As the sun dipped below the mountains, Brennan descended the ladder and joined his crew in the garage. Cassian looked up from the motorcycle, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad, Raven says I'm ready for my first solo ride, just around the block." Brennan looked at Raven, who stood with his arms crossed, a faint smile playing at his lips. "He's got good instincts," Raven said, "respects the machine, understands the responsibility." Brennan studied his son, 16 now, tall and lean, eyes bright with life. He thought about the terrified 12-year-old who had walked into a biker bar and begged for help. That boy was still there, but he'd been forged into something stronger, something unbreakable. "All right," Brennan said, "but you wear the helmet. You follow every traffic law, and you're back in 10 minutes. Cassian whooped, strapping on the helmet. Raven handed him the keys, and the engine roared to life. Brennan's heart clenched as his son rolled out into the street, but he didn't call him back. Some lessons required trust. Elena appeared, slipping her hand into Brennan's. "He'll be fine." "I know," Brennan whispered, "but I'll still worry." Raven stepped beside them, watching Cassian disappear around the corner. "That boy saved you by refusing to give up. Now you save him by letting him grow. That's the harder part." Brennan nodded. "Thank you for everything, for the rescue, for mentoring him, for being the kind of man worth emulating." Raven was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You pulled me out of a fire when I was nobody to you. You didn't see a biker or an outlaw. You saw a human being who needed help. That changed me, Brennan. It reminded me why honor matters, why promises aren't just words." He turned to face Brennan fully. "So when your boy came knocking, I didn't see a debt to repay. I saw a chance to pass forward what you gave me. And that's the real legacy, not the rescue, but the chain of goodness it started." Brennan's throat tightened. Before he could respond, Cassian roared back into view, pulling up smoothly, his grin splitting his face. That was incredible. The dedication ceremony that night was packed. 500 people filled the town square. The memorial wall gleamed under floodlights, black granite etched with names and dates. When Brennan's name was unveiled, the crowd stood and applauded for 5 full minutes. He felt embarrassed, humbled, overwhelmed. But when he looked out and saw Raven standing with his convoy, arms raised in silent salute, he understood. This wasn't about glorifying individuals. It was about honoring the bonds that held communities together. Years later, when Cassian Merrick graduated from the Fire Academy and earned his badge, Brennan stood in the audience beside Raven. The boy, now a man, took his oath with his hand over his heart, his voice steady and strong. And when it was done, he walked directly to Brennan, then to Raven, shaking both their hands. "I wouldn't be here without either of you," Cassian said. Raven gripped his shoulder. "You earned this yourself, kid. We just held the door open." But Brennan knew the truth. The real door had opened the night a terrified boy walked into a biker bar and asked for help, and the legacy of that moment would ripple through Cedar Ridge for generations, a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. That honor isn't given, it's earned through action, and that promises, when kept, become the threads that weave broken lives back together. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of courage, honor, and the promises that bind us together. These are the confessions of the North, where loyalty is forged in iron and delivered with fire.